All right, so ready to dive into a story that's, well, pretty wild.
I'm always up for a wild ride. What do we got?
The Faroese financial crisis.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah. That's a big one.
Big is an understatement. We're talking boom, bust, the whole shebang. But
Uh,
first things first, picture this, all right?
okay.
You're in the North Atlantic, kind of chilly, wind in your hair, surrounded by these dramatic cliffs.
Sounds beautiful.
It is. And nestled among those cliffs, you've got these colorful houses, like something out of a fairy tale.
Mm.
Welcome to the Faroe Islands.
The Faroe Islands, known for, what is it? Stunning landscapes and
Well,
a whole lot of fish.
you got it. And that, my friend, is where our story really begins. Because the Faroe Islands and fishing, they're like two peas in a pod.
Totally. I mean, it's their lifeblood, economically speaking.
Exactly. So rewind to the 1980s. Disco's fading, shoulder pads are in, and the Faroe Islands, they are on fire. Economically speaking, that is. We're talking a full-blown boom. And what's fueling it? You guessed it. Fish.
It was a perfect storm, really. You had new government policies coming in, really pushing for expansion in the fishing industry, specifically aquaculture.
Aquaculture. So like fish farming.
Exactly. And it wasn't just a local thing. Globally, the demand for fish, through the roof. Prices were sky high, and everyone wanted a piece of the action.
It's like that gold rush mentality, right?
Mm-hmm.
Except instead of gold, it's, well, cod.
Exactly. Everyone was so optimistic, investing like crazy in new boats, fancy new equipment. It was like a party, and no one wanted it to end.
I even read they started a whole new bank. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
The optimism must have been off the charts.
Oh, it was. And aquaculture, that was the poster child. I mean, in 1980, you had a grand total of 2 licenses for fish farming.
2? Seriously?
Fast forward to just 1983, 14 licenses. Talk about a boom.
That's insane.
It was huge. At one point, fish farming, this industry that was practically non-existent a few years prior, it was making up 20% of all Faroes exports.
20%. That's massive. Talk about putting all your eggs in one basket, though.
Yeah, about that.
Because when it rains, it pours, right? And in this case, the rain came in the form of plummeting fish prices. We're talking the late 1980s, the music stops, and the bottom falls out of the market.
It was a recipe for disaster, really. You have this economy that's become so reliant on one single industry, and suddenly that industry takes a nosedive.
Talk about a reality check, huh?
It was brutal. And remember all that investment, all that easy credit flowing during the boom times?
Everyone's living large, thinking it'll last forever.
Exactly. Well, it all came back to bite them.
Yeah.
Hard.
It's like the rug got pulled out from under them.
Yeah, pretty much.
So you have this nation built on fishing,
Right.
And suddenly that foundation is crumbling.
What's the human cost of all this? Like, what were people actually going through during this time?
Well, imagine, if you will, 10% of your population?
10%.
10%
Yeah.
leaving, packing up and heading elsewhere to find work, to find opportunity, just gone.
That's a mass exodus. Where did they even go?
A lot of them went to Denmark, you know?
Like so. Hoping for a fresh start, something new. And for some, it wasn't temporary. They built new lives elsewhere, never came back to the islands.
Wow. That's really got to make you think. It's one thing to talk about economic indicators, you know?
Right.
But this is people's lives we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Their homes, their families, just uprooted.
It was a tough time, no doubt.
So, okay, the economy's in shambles, people are leaving.
Yeah.
What happens next? How do the Faroe Islands even begin to dig themselves out of this hole?
Well, they didn't have much choice.
Right.
The government had to act, and fast.
I bet.
They ended up going to Denmark, hat in hand, really,
Oh, boy.
and borrowing a staggering amount of money, 2.7 billion kroner, basically a lifeline.
Talk about being stuck between a rock and a hard place. I mean, they're already so reliant on Denmark, and now they need this massive bailout.
Yeah.
How did that impact their relationship? Was there tension?
Oh, absolutely. You've got to remember, the Faroese people, they're fiercely independent.
Yeah.
Proud of their heritage, you know? And to suddenly need this level of assistance from Denmark, well, let's just say it created some complicated feelings.
I bet. It makes you wonder if there was any resentment. Like on Denmark's side, maybe a little bit of, we told you so. Or from the Faroe Islands, maybe a you owe us kind of vibe.
Totally. It definitely added a layer of complexity to the relationship, no doubt. And it really brought to the forefront this question of autonomy versus dependence, something that's still debated today, actually.
Wow. So even decades later, the ripple effects are still being felt.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay, so they get this massive loan. But what about the banks? Those 2 big ones we talked about, the ones teetering on the edge, what happened to them?
It was a do-or-die situation, really. They had to make a tough call.
And
Bank and Faroe Bank were
right.
forced to merge, combined into one entity to try to, survive. This was in 1994.
I can't imagine that went over well with everyone.
It wasn't pretty, but honestly, it was a necessary evil. It was the only way to stabilize the whole financial system.
Right, because if those banks go down,
Everything goes down with them.
exactly. It's like a house of cards.
And we can't forget, this is a small community we're talking about, right? These weren't just faceless institutions. These were people's life savings.
Their dreams.
Exactly, their hopes for the future. It was a lot to process for everyone involved.
So you've got bailouts, bank mergers, an exodus of people. It feels like a long road to recovery. What pulled the Faroe Islands out of this crisis?
Well, it's interesting, actually.
It's like they dodged a bullet, but at what cost,
Hmm.
right? So they're tightening their belts, making those tough choices, trying to rebuild. Was there anything else that helped them bounce back?
Well, you're not going to believe this. Remember their old friend, or maybe I should say frenemy, the fishing industry.
The one that started it all.
The one and only. It started to make a comeback.
Get out. You mean the very thing that caused the crisis ends up helping them recover?
It's a crazy twist, isn't it? Cod fishing in particular saw a real resurgence.
Wow, talk about a roller coaster.
Yeah.
But I guess it goes to show the sea, it's in their blood.
It's part of their DNA, their
Mm.
identity, their livelihood. But it also highlights the inherent risk of relying so heavily on any one industry, no matter how abundant it may seem at the time.
No doubt. Okay, so they weather the storm, get back on their feet, and then, bam, 2008 hits, the global financial crisis.
Yep.
No one was immune to that one. How did the Faroe Islands manage that time around?
Well, no one came out of 2008 totally unscathed, right? But the Faroe Islands, maybe because of what they went through, those hard lessons, they actually weathered the storm better than a lot of other countries.
Like they had been battle tested.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about the relationship with Denmark, especially after everything. The boom, the bust, that massive bailout, the slow climb back up.
Yeah.
How did all of that shape their bond, do you think?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And honestly, there's no easy answer. It's complicated. Some people will tell you that the bailout, it bred resentment, like a big reminder of Denmark's economic influence. While others will say, no, it actually brought them closer together, proof that Denmark will always have their back, no matter what.
So even now, decades later, it's still a bit of a gray area. What a story. This whole thing has been quite a ride. For our listeners out there, what's the one thing that really sticks with you from all of this?
For me, it's the resilience of the Faroes people. I mean, they faced incredible odds, unbelievable challenges, but they never gave up. It speaks volumes about the power of community, the ability to adapt, to overcome, and that deep, deep connection to their heritage, to who they are.
Absolutely. And it really makes you question those economic models that are so reliant on just one thing, no matter how plentiful it might seem. Plus, we can't forget the human cost. The immigration, the uncertainty, the sheer effort it took to rebuild. It gives you a new appreciation for just how fragile things can be, even when they appear strong on the surface.
Couldn't have said it better myself. The Faroes financial crisis, it's a powerful reminder. Behind every statistic, every economic indicator, there are people with real stories, real struggles. And sometimes those stories are ones of incredible resilience, of an unbreakable bond between a nation and its people.
Beautifully said. And there you have it, folks. Our deep dive into the Faroes financial crisis. It's a story full of twists and turns, with lessons that reach far beyond the shores of this small island nation. Until next time, keep exploring, and remember, every crisis, no matter how tough, holds the potential for growth, and maybe even a little bit of wisdom if you know where to look.